Something happened last week or maybe last month. You were certain of it. You remembered the exact words, the exact moment, the way it felt in your chest. Then someone looked you in the eye and told you it never happened. They said it so calmly, so confidently, that a part of you began to wonder. Maybe you were wrong. Maybe you misheard. Maybe you are more sensitive than you realized. So, you apologized. And then you apologized again for apologizing. You started second-guessing your own memories, not just about that one moment, but about everything. You began editing your thoughts before you spoke them, afraid of being told again that you were wrong. You started asking people around you to confirm things you already knew to be true. And somewhere in that process, without even noticing it, you lost trust in your own mind. That feeling, that slow erosion of confidence in yourself has a name. Gaslighting is a form of psychological manipulation in which one person causes another to question their perception, memory, and sanity. The term originates from a 1940 British play called Gaslight, later adapted into a film, in which a husband deliberately dims the gas lights in his home and denies the change is happening, causing his wife to believe she is losing her mind. Today, the term describes a pattern of behavior used in romantic relationships, families, workplaces, and friendships. Dr. Robin Stern, a psychologist at Yale University and author of The Gaslight Effect, describes gaslighting as a relationship dynamic, not simply an isolated incident. She emphasizes that the pattern often begins so gradually that the person being manipulated rarely notices the shift until significant damage has already been done. Dr. Stephanie Sarkis, a psychotherapist and author of Gaslighting, recognizes manipulative and emotionally abusive people, identifies gaslighting as a deliberate tool of control. Her research shows that gaslighters share consistent behavioral patterns, regardless of whether they are conscious of the harm they are causing. What makes gaslighting so dangerous is not any single moment of manipulation. It is the accumulation, the slow, consistent pressure on your perception over time. And what makes it so difficult to recognize is that it targets the very tool you would use to identify it, your own judgment. Understanding the warning signs is not about diagnosing someone else or labeling a relationship. It is about giving yourself permission to trust what you already sense. Here are the 8 warning signs. Sign 1, they deny what you clearly remember. You brought something up, a promise that was made, a conversation that happened. You remembered it clearly, the words, the context, the feeling afterward. And the response was flat, immediate, and certain. That never happened. Not, I don't remember it that way. Not, are you sure? Just a clean, confident denial of something you know to be real. That experience sits at the heart of the first sign of gaslighting: systematic memory denial. Memory denial, in clinical terms, refers to a pattern in which one person consistently rejects or contradicts the documented or witnessed recollections of another. Dr. Jennifer Freyd, a psychologist at the University of Oregon, developed a framework called betrayal trauma theory. Her research shows that when manipulation comes from someone we trust, a partner, a parent, a close friend, our minds are actually less equipped to recognize it. We are wired, neurologically, to extend trust to people in our inner circle. A gaslighter exploits this wiring by placing their confident denial directly against your uncertain memory. Over time, their certainty wins not because they are right, but because doubt is more psychologically painful than submission. Here is what this looks like in daily life. You tell your partner, "You said you would be home by 7. I planned dinner around that." They respond, "I never said 7. I don't know where you got that from." You feel confused. You replay the conversation in your mind, searching for the error. Maybe you misheard. Maybe you filled in a detail that wasn't there. You say, "I'm pretty sure you said 7. They say, "You always do this. You remember things the way you want to remember them." And now the conversation has shifted from what was said to what is wrong with you. Notice that transition, that pivot from the content of the disagreement to the credibility of your memory is the signature of gaslighting. Another example. A colleague tells you in a meeting that they never received your report. You know you sent it. You remember writing it, attaching it, pressing send, but they insist, with calm authority, that nothing arrived. Later, when you find the sent email, they say, "I must have missed it, but you should have followed up." The denial has quietly become your failure. Consider the experience of a woman we will call Claire. Claire had been in a relationship for 3 years when she first began to notice something was wrong with her memory, or so she believed. Her partner, whenever confronted about plans they had made together, would respond with complete confusion. He would look at her with what seemed like genuine concern and ask if she was feeling all right. At first, Claire assumed she was stressed. She started keeping a journal to track her own reliability. She found, reading back through her entries, that she had been right about the plans each time. When she showed her partner one entry, her own handwriting, dated, detailed, he told her the journal proved nothing, that she could have written it at any time. That moment shook something loose in Claire. She realized that no evidence she could produce would ever be accepted. The problem had never been her memory. The problem was that her memory was being strategically undermined. Claire eventually connected with a therapist who helped her understand that her experience had a name and a pattern. Naming it did not fix everything immediately, but it gave her a foundation to stand on. She stopped apologizing for remembering things correctly. From inside a relationship, memory denial is almost invisible. This is because the person doing the denying is someone you love, someone you have chosen to trust. When they express certainty, your brain registers it as important information. Dr. Elizabeth Loftus, a cognitive psychologist at the University of California, Irvine, has spent decades studying memory's malleability. Her research demonstrates that memory is not a recording, it is a reconstruction. And reconstructions are vulnerable to outside input. When someone you trust confidently contradicts your recollection repeatedly, over time your brain begins to incorporate their version into your own. This is not weakness. This is how human memory works under social pressure. The result is that you do not just doubt the specific memory. You begin to doubt yourself as a reliable witness to your own life. The protection strategy for this sign is documentation. Not because you need proof to show anyone else, but because you need an anchor. Dr. Stern recommends keeping a private record, a journal, a note on your phone, a voice memo of significant conversations, agreements, and events as they happen. This record is not about building a legal case. It is about maintaining your own connection to what is real. When you notice yourself beginning to doubt a memory, you can return to the record. You can say to yourself, "I wrote this down at the time. My memory was accurate." Over time, this habit rebuilds trust in your own perception, and that trust is the first thing gaslighting tries to take from you. Sign 2, they trivialize your feelings. You tried to express something that hurt you. You chose your words carefully. You kept your voice steady. You said, "When you did that, I felt dismissed." And the response came quickly, "You're too sensitive. You always make everything into a big deal." In that moment, the conversation stopped being about what happened and became about what is wrong with you for having feelings about it. Trivialization is the second sign of gaslighting, and it operates differently from memory denial. Where denial targets what you remember, trivialization targets what you feel. Dr. Sarkis defines emotional trivialization as a pattern in which a person consistently minimizes, mocks, or dismisses another person's emotional responses, especially when those responses are a reaction to the trivializer's own behavior. Research published in the Journal of Social and Personal Relationships has found that repeated emotional invalidation, being told your feelings are wrong, excessive, or irrational, is strongly associated with decreased self-esteem and increased anxiety over time. The mechanism is straightforward. When your emotional responses are consistently labeled as flawed, you learn to suppress them. And when you suppress your own feelings long enough, you lose access to your own internal warning system. Trivialization appears in language that sounds almost reasonable. You're overreacting. I was just joking. Can't you take a joke? Other people would not be bothered by something so small. I can't say anything to you without you getting upset. Each of these statements, delivered in isolation, might be a fair observation, but repeated, in response to your attempts to communicate genuine hurt, they form a pattern of control. They teach you that your feelings are a liability, something to be managed, hidden, or ashamed of. A man we will call Daniel had grown up learning to stay calm under pressure. He prided himself on emotional regulation. He did not dramatize. He did not exaggerate. When he entered a new relationship, he tried once to tell his partner that a comment she made in front of friends had embarrassed him. She laughed and said, "You are the most sensitive man I have ever met. I thought you were confident." He said nothing more. He told himself she was right, he was being too sensitive. Over the following 2 years, whenever Daniel tried to raise something that had hurt him, the same script played out. He was too sensitive. He was too emotional. He needed to toughen up. By the time Daniel entered therapy, he could not identify a single feeling he trusted. He described it as living behind glass, watching his own life without being able to touch it. His therapist helped him reconnect with his emotional responses slowly, one at a time. The first step was simply naming a feeling without immediately judging whether it was valid. That was harder than it sounds, but it was the beginning of coming back to himself. Emotional trivialization is invisible from inside because the messages align with things you may already believe about yourself. If you grew up being told you were too sensitive, too emotional, or too dramatic, the gaslighter's words will not feel foreign. They will feel familiar, and familiarity feels like truth. Dr. Bessel van der Kolk, a psychiatrist and trauma researcher at Boston University and author of The Body Keeps the Score, explains that repeated emotional invalidation in childhood creates neural pathways that make later invalidation feel normal, even expected. When someone tells you your feelings are wrong, part of your brain agrees not because you are right or wrong, but because it has heard this before. This is why victims of trivialization often believe the problem is their own emotional instability. The pattern was laid down long before the current relationship began. The protection strategy here is feeling validation specifically. Self-validation. Dr. Marsha Linehan, a psychologist at the University of Washington and the founder of dialectical behavior therapy, developed a framework for emotional validation that begins with yourself. The practice is simple in structure, though difficult in execution. When you notice a feeling, name it, acknowledge it, and identify what triggered it before you bring it to anyone else. I felt hurt when that happened. My hurt makes sense given what occurred. This internal validation does not require the other person's agreement. It requires only that you trust yourself enough to witness your own emotional experience. Over time, that practice becomes a shield. You stop needing their validation to know that your feelings are real. Sign 3. They shift blame onto you. Something went wrong between the two of you. They said something cutting. Maybe they forgot something important. Maybe they broke a promise. You tried to address it carefully, respectfully, and somehow, by the end of the conversation, you were the one apologizing. You walked away confused about how it happened, but certain it must have been your fault. Blame shifting is the third sign of gaslighting, and it is one of the most psychologically sophisticated. It does not simply deflect responsibility. It actively redirects it, placing the origin of the problem squarely on the person who raised the concern. Dr. George Simon, a clinical psychologist and author of In Sheep's Clothing, Understanding and Dealing with Manipulative People, describes blame shifting as a core tool of what he calls covert aggression. His research identifies a specific maneuver. The gaslighter responds to any confrontation by immediately identifying something the other person did, whether related or not, and using it to neutralize the original complaint. This technique works because it forces the person who raised the concern into a defensive position. You came in with a grievance. You left defending yourself. Blame shifting sounds like this in practice. You say, "I was hurt when you didn't show up to the thing I asked you to come to." They say, "You know how stressed I've been. You never consider what I'm going through." Or, "Well, if you hadn't made me feel so pressured, I wouldn't have needed space." Or, "You always bring things up at the worst possible time." That's why these conversations go nowhere. Notice that none of these responses address what you actually raised. Each one pivots to something you did, something you failed to consider, something that justifies their behavior by indicting yours. A woman we will call Miriam had been trying for months to have a calm conversation with her partner about how she felt unsupported during a period of illness. Every time she tried, the conversation ended with her feeling guilty for bringing it up. She was told she was being manipulative by playing the victim. She was told she had a history of using health issues to control people. She was told that her timing was always designed to hurt him. Miriam started writing down what she intended to say before each conversation and what she ended up discussing instead. The pattern was unmistakable on paper. She always went in with one topic. She always came out apologizing for something unrelated. When she shared these notes with a therapist, the therapist asked her one question. In any of these conversations, did your original concern ever get addressed? It had not. Not once. That was when Miriam understood what had been happening. Blame shifting is difficult to detect from the inside because it exploits something healthy about you, your willingness to take responsibility. Most people who end up in relationships with gaslighters are not passive or weak. They are often empathetic, self-reflective, and committed to fairness. Those qualities make you an ideal target for blame shifting. Because when someone says, "You made me do this," your empathetic mind actually stops and considers, "Did I?" Dr. Simon describes this as the gaslighter, using your conscience against you. Your willingness to examine your own role, a genuinely healthy trait, is weaponized to make you accept responsibility for their behavior. The protection strategy for blame shifting is what therapists call topic anchoring. Before any difficult conversation, identify the single issue you need to address and write it down. If the conversation begins to move away from that issue, gently name what is happening. You might say, "I want to stay focused on what I brought up. We can talk about other concerns separately." This is not combative. It is a boundary, a structural one, designed to protect the conversation itself. Dr. Simon recommends practicing this skill first in lower-stakes situations, where the emotional pressure is not as high. Over time, it becomes a reflex. You recognize the pivot, name it internally, and return to the original point. That simple act, holding your ground on a topic, interrupts the blame-shifting cycle before it can complete. Sign 4. They recruit others against you. There was a moment when you realized that other people who mattered to you, seemed to have a very specific impression of you. They were concerned. They mentioned things they had heard. They looked at you with a kind of careful pity, or a guarded distance you could not explain. You did not know what had been said. You only knew that the story about you had been written without you. This is the fourth sign of gaslighting, the use of third parties to reinforce the manipulator's narrative. Psychologists refer to this as flying monkeys, a term drawn from popular culture, or more clinically, as proxy manipulation or triangulation. Dr. Sarkis explains that gaslighters rarely work in isolation. They understand, intuitively or deliberately, that isolation is more effective when it is social. When you not only doubt yourself, but find that others seem to share that doubt. Research on social identity and belonging, conducted at the University of Michigan by Dr. Kipling Williams, demonstrates that social exclusion activates the same neural pathways as physical pain. Gaslighters who recruit others are essentially weaponizing your need to belong. Proxy manipulation looks like this in daily life. Your partner mentions to your mutual friends that they are worried about you. They say you have been struggling or under a lot of pressure or not yourself lately. By the time you arrive at a gathering, the concern is already in the room. People ask how you are doing in a way that is slightly too careful. You sense that a version of you has been circulating, one you did not create and cannot correct, because you do not know exactly what was said. In families, this pattern often involves a parent or sibling who frames their manipulation to other relatives as concern. "I just don't know what's gotten into her lately. He's been so difficult. I'm trying to help him, but he won't listen." The gaslighter presents themselves as the patient, long-suffering party, and others, hearing this consistently, begin to see you through that lens. A young man we will call Adrian came from a close-knit family. When he began to set limits with his mother, limits that his therapist had helped him identify as healthy, his mother responded by contacting his siblings one by one. She told each of them, with evident pain, that Adrian was pulling away from the family. She did not mention the limits he had set or why he had set them. She mentioned only that she was hurt, that she was confused, and that she feared she was losing her son. Adrian began receiving messages from siblings he was close to, expressing concern about his behavior. One of them said, "Mom seems really broken. What's going on with you?" Adrian felt the ground shift beneath him. He had done something healthy and found himself positioned as the aggressor. He spent months rebuilding those relationships, one careful conversation at a time, sharing his perspective without demanding anyone take sides. Some siblings came to understand, some did not. But Adrian learned that his healing could not depend on unanimous agreement from his family. He had to know his own truth, even when others had been given a different version of it. Proxy manipulation is particularly invisible because the people being used against you often have no idea they are being used. They genuinely believe they are acting out of concern. Your mother is not lying when she says she is worried about you. She believes it. Your friends are not being cruel. When they treat you carefully, they are responding to what they have been told. This is what makes confronting proxy manipulation so difficult. You are not dealing with a conspiracy. You are dealing with a carefully crafted narrative that others have accepted in good faith. Dr. Lundy Bancroft, a counselor and researcher who spent years working with abusive relationships, notes in his work that this pattern is specifically designed to leave the target without allies. When everyone around you has been primed to see you as unstable, emotionally unreliable, or difficult, you have no one to verify your reality with. And that isolation is the goal. The protection strategy here is selective transparency. You do not need to correct the record with everyone. Choose one or two people in your life whose judgment you trust, people who have known you across different contexts and different versions of yourself. Share your perspective with them directly and honestly without asking them to take sides. Give them the space to form their own conclusions. Dr. Bancroft recommends identifying what he calls reality anchors. People who knew you before the current relationship or dynamic, who can reflect back to you a version of yourself that predates the manipulation. These people are not just emotional support. They are a practical counterweight to the narrative that has been built around you. Protect those relationships. Prioritize them. They may be the thread that keeps you connected to who you actually are. Sign 5, they rewrite history. You look back on something, a trip you took together, a fight you had, a decision that was made, and you remember it one way. When it comes up in conversation, they describe it entirely differently. Not just, differently in emphasis or interpretation, but in the actual facts of what happened. And they describe their version with such confidence, such detail, such apparent conviction, that you begin to wonder if your own memory has failed you again. History revision is the fifth sign of gaslighting, and it operates over a longer timeline than simple memory denial. Where memory denial targets specific recent events, history revision gradually rewrites the entire shared narrative of a relationship or family. Dr. Stern describes this process as retroactive reframing, in which past events are given new meanings that serve the gaslighter's current needs. The research of Dr. Daniel Schachter, a cognitive neuroscientist at Harvard University and author of The 7 Sins of Memory, explains that memory is reconstructive by nature. Every time we recall a memory, we slightly alter it. This is a normal feature of human cognition, not a flaw. Gaslighters exploit this feature deliberately. They introduce competing versions of events not to clarify, but to destabilize. History revision sounds like this in daily experience. You loved that trip. You said it was the best vacation of your life. You remember the trip as difficult, that you had argued, that you had felt invisible, but they say it with such certainty that you question your own experience. Or, you've always been jealous of my success. Even back when we first started dating. You do not remember jealousy. You remember pride, support, quiet worry about finances. But their version is so confident, so specific, that it plants a seed of doubt. Over time, seeds of doubt accumulate. Your memories of the relationship, who you were in it, what you felt, how you behaved, begin to be replaced by their version of events. A woman we will call Serena had been married for 8 years when she began writing a personal memoir as a therapeutic exercise. She wanted to document her own story in her own words, reclaiming a sense of authorship over her experience. When her husband found the early pages, he sat down with her and walked her through each story she had written. He did not yell. He did not threaten. He simply offered his version of each event, calmly and in detail, suggesting gently that she had misremembered or taken things out of context. After an hour of this, Serena had changed several entries. She felt grateful to him for helping her be more accurate. Only later, in therapy, did she recognize what had happened. She had allowed someone else to edit her own memories. The exercise of writing the memoir intended to give her back. Her story had been used to take more of it from her. She rewrote the memoir. This time, she did not share it. History revision is invisible from the inside because it works gradually and because it appeals to our desire to have a shared narrative with the people we love. When you are in a long-term relationship, you naturally want a version of events that both of you agree on. Disagreement about the past is uncomfortable. It feels like evidence of incompatibility or confusion. So when your partner offers a confident alternative version, part of your mind reaches for it because consensus feels safer than conflict. Dr. Freud's research on betrayal trauma shows that this drive toward consensus is stronger when the person doing the rewriting is someone whose approval or attachment you need. Your brain will sacrifice accuracy for connection. This is not weakness, it is attachment. But it is also how your personal history gets quietly replaced with someone else's version. The protection strategy for history revision is memory preservation. Keep records not just of current events, but of your emotional experience at the time. After a significant experience, a vacation, a conflict, an important conversation, write down how you felt as soon as possible, in your own words. Note the details that mattered to you, the things that were said, the way you experienced the moment. These records are not evidence. They are anchors. Dr. Schachter recommends a practice he calls memory consolidation, journaling, writing about important experiences within 24 hours, when the emotional imprint is still fresh. Over time, this creates a living archive of your own experience that cannot be retroactively rewritten by someone else. Your history belongs to you. Keeping a record of it is an act of self-preservation. Sign 6. They question your sanity. There is a moment that stands apart from all the others. It is the moment when they looked at you, perhaps, with what appeared to be genuine concern and said something like, "I'm worried about you. You haven't been well." Or, "You need help. This is not normal behavior." Or simply, "You're losing your mind." And even knowing everything you know, some part of you believed them. Questioning a person's sanity is the sixth and perhaps most devastating sign of gaslighting. It is the point at which the manipulation shifts, from targeting your memory or feelings to targeting your mental stability itself. Dr. Sarkis identifies this as the nuclear option in the gaslighter's toolkit. When earlier tactics denial, trivialization, blame shifting have sufficiently eroded your confidence, this final escalation is designed to complete the process. If you believe you are mentally unwell, you will not trust your perceptions. You will not seek help, because seeking help feels like confirming the very instability they have been describing. And you will remain dependent on the person who is harming you, because they have positioned themselves as the only stable force in your unstable life. Sanity questioning appears in both blunt and subtle forms. The blunt form: "You're crazy. You need to see a psychiatrist." The subtle form: "I'm not sure you're well enough to be making decisions like this right now." Or, "Everyone has noticed the change in you. Even your mother said she's worried." Or, "You should really talk to someone. What you just described sounds like a breakdown." Each of these statements is structured to place you in the position of a person whose mental reliability is in question and to position the speaker as a concerned, rational observer. A man we will call Thomas had struggled with anxiety earlier in his life. His partner was aware of this history. When Thomas began to express concerns about his partner's behavior, the unexplained absences, the inconsistencies in what he was told, his partner began referencing his history. "This is your anxiety talking," she would say. "You have always had trouble trusting people. This is a pattern for you. I think you need to go back to therapy. Something is off." Thomas did go back to therapy, and there, with the support of a trained professional, he was able to separate what was anxiety and what was a legitimate response to a real pattern. His therapist told him something he carried for years afterward. "Your concern is not a symptom, it is a signal." Thomas left the relationship. He also left with a clearer understanding of his own mental health than he had ever had before, because he had been forced to examine it so thoroughly. Sanity questioning is invisible from inside because mental health stigma does its work for the gaslighter. Most people carry some uncertainty about their own psychological stability. We know that our moods fluctuate, that our perception can be colored by fear or grief or past trauma. When someone exploits that uncertainty, when they point to it as evidence of a problem, we have no clean line to point to and say, "No, I am fine. This is real." Dr. van der Kolk's research demonstrates that people with trauma histories are particularly vulnerable to this tactic because they have real evidence from their own past that their nervous system can produce distorted responses. Their self-doubt is not irrational. It has a history, and the gaslighter uses that history as a weapon. The protection strategy for sanity questioning is professional grounding. Seek out a therapist, counselor, or psychologist, someone who has no connection to the person questioning your sanity and no stake in the outcome. Describe your experiences to that professional honestly, including the self-doubt. Allow them to reflect back what they observe. The American Psychological Association recommends that when someone is being told repeatedly that their perceptions are not reliable, independent psychological assessment can be both clarifying and protective. You do not need to prove anything to anyone else. You need one grounded, Professional perspective that is yours alone, not filtered through the person who has been distorting your reality. That perspective can become the foundation from which you rebuild your trust in yourself. Sign 7. They use your vulnerability against you. You trusted them with something. Maybe it was something from your past, a wound that had never fully healed. Maybe it was a fear, a shame, a secret struggle you had never told anyone else. You shared it because it felt safe, because the relationship felt like a place where you did not have to protect yourself so carefully. And for a while, that seemed true. Then, something shifted, and in a moment of conflict, or dismissal, or control, they used it. Not cruelly, necessarily. Not always obviously. But it appeared that thing you had trusted them with, and suddenly you were defending yourself against your own honesty. The exploitation of vulnerability is the 7th sign of gaslighting, and it is perhaps the most intimate betrayal on this list. It requires the gaslighter to have first built genuine trust, to have been genuinely close to you in some way. Dr. Brené Brown, a research professor at the University of Houston who has spent decades studying vulnerability and shame, describes what she calls chandeliering, the experience of sharing something vulnerable and having it used as a weapon later in a way that makes you feel as though the ceiling has collapsed on you. Her research demonstrates that the experience of having vulnerability weaponized produces a specific kind of shame response, one that attaches not to the original disclosure, but to the act of trusting itself. In other words, it does not just hurt you. It teaches you that openness is dangerous. Vulnerability, exploitation, sounds like this in lived experience. You once told your partner about a period in your life when you struggled with alcohol. You told them in a moment of closeness, trusting them with a part of your history you rarely shared. Later, during a conflict about something entirely unrelated, they say, "This is just like when you were drinking. You can't handle difficult situations." The comment is not accurate, but it is specifically, surgically, designed to strike at the place you are most uncertain about yourself. Or, you confided in a colleague that you sometimes struggle with imposter syndrome at work. Later, when you raise a legitimate concern in a meeting, they say, "I know you sometimes doubt yourself in professional settings. I wonder if that's coloring how you're seeing this." Your self-disclosure has become a tool of dismissal. A woman we will call Nadia had spent years processing the impact of a difficult childhood. She had done genuine therapeutic work. She was proud of the growth that work represented. When she entered a new relationship, she shared some of that history with her partner, not as a warning, but as context, as intimacy. Over the months that followed, she noticed that whenever she raised a concern about his behavior, about the relationship, about something she needed, he would reference her past. You know your childhood makes you more sensitive to these things. Have you talked to your therapist about these feelings? They might be coming from somewhere old. I worry that what you experienced before is making it hard for you to see what's actually happening here. Each response was delivered gently, with an air of care. But each one redirected her concern away from him and back to her own history. By the time Nadia recognized the pattern, she had stopped raising concerns altogether. She had learned that her vulnerability was a liability. In therapy, she worked to separate the valid insights about her history from the weaponized version her partner had been using. That distinction between genuine self-knowledge and strategic self-doubt planted by someone else was the most important work she did. Vulnerability exploitation is invisible from the inside because it is delivered in the language of concern. "I'm worried this might be triggering something for you." These words can come from genuine love, and they can come from manipulation. From inside the relationship, they sound identical. Dr. Brown's research on vulnerability identifies what she calls the vulnerability hangover, the feeling of regret or exposure after sharing something personal. When vulnerability is weaponized, that hangover becomes permanent. You begin to close off not because you do not want to be close, but because closeness has proven dangerous. The tragedy of this sign is that it transforms your most honest and courageous acts into sources of shame. The protection strategy for vulnerability exploitation is what Dr. Brown calls FFTs, first 5 thoughts. Before sharing something deeply personal with someone, she recommends asking yourself 5 questions. Has this person demonstrated they can hold my trust carefully? Have they kept confidences before? Do I trust their intentions when we are in conflict? Would I be comfortable if this information were used against me later? Have they shown me who they are when they are under pressure? If you cannot answer most of those questions with confidence, the disclosure may not be safe, not yet. Vulnerability is not something to withhold permanently. It is something to offer only to relationships that have demonstrated they can receive it with care. Trust is earned in the small moments, and those small moments are the data you use to decide what is safe to share. Sign 8. You feel worse after every conversation. Think about the last difficult conversation you had with this person. Before it, you felt some version of concerned, or hurt, or uncertain but grounded in something real. After it, you felt confused, deflated, somehow responsible, and less certain of yourself than you were at the start. Now think about whether that is the pattern, whether every attempt to communicate something important leaves you feeling smaller than when you began. The 8th sign of gaslighting is the cumulative effect, the consistent, measurable erosion of your psychological well-being after interactions with this person. This sign is different from the others because it is not a behavior to identify in someone else. It is a pattern to identify in yourself. Dr. Stern's clinical work identifies what she calls the gaslight stage 3, the point at which the person being manipulated no longer needs the gaslighter to actively manipulate them. The internal voice of self-doubt has become fully internalized. You second-guess yourself without being prompted. You apologize before being accused. You edit your perceptions before they fully form. This sign manifests in ways you might not immediately connect to the relationship itself. You feel exhausted in a way sleep does not fix. You dread bringing anything up, even things that matter deeply to you. You find yourself rehearsing conversations in your head for hours before having them, anticipating the ways they will go wrong, the ways you will be found at fault. You feel a specific kind of relief when the other person is simply not present, not because you do not care about them, but because their absence is the only time you feel fully yourself. That relief is information. It is your nervous system telling you that the relationship has become a source of threat rather than safety. A man we will call Marcus had not noticed the accumulation until his doctor pointed it out. He had come in for a routine appointment and mentioned, almost in passing, that he had been sleeping poorly and feeling foggy. His doctor asked a series of questions about stress, about relationships, about what his daily life felt like. Marcus found himself describing his relationship without quite intending to. He talked about the exhaustion of conversations, the way he always seemed to come out of them wrong. His doctor referred him to a therapist, and Marcus went skeptically at first. In the second session, his therapist asked him to describe how he felt before a difficult conversation with his partner, and then how he felt after. The gap between those two descriptions was so large that Marcus fell silent for almost a full minute. Before, nervous but purposeful, wanting resolution. After, defeated, confused, and somehow guilty without knowing what he had done. That gap, his therapist said, is data. Marcus had been treating his own emotional state as a symptom of a personal failing. His therapist helped him understand it as a response to something real. The cumulative effect of gaslighting is invisible from inside because it looks, from the inside, like your own decline. Your confidence has diminished, so you believe you are less capable than you used to be. Your trust in your perceptions has eroded, so you believe your perceptions were never reliable. Your emotional responses have become muted or unpredictable, so you believe you have lost control of your own mind. But the research of Dr. Judith Herman, a psychiatrist at Harvard Medical School and author of Trauma and Recovery, demonstrates clearly that these are not personal failures. They are predictable, measurable responses to prolonged psychological manipulation. Your mind has adapted to an environment that required you to abandon yourself in order to survive the relationship. That adaptation is not weakness. It is intelligence operating under impossible conditions. The protection strategy for this sign is pattern tracking applied specifically to your own internal experience. Over the course of 2 weeks, keep a brief daily record. Note how you feel before a significant interaction with this person and how you feel after. Do not evaluate the content of the conversation. Focus only on your internal state. After 2 weeks, read the record back. If the pattern consistently shows deterioration, if you reliably feel smaller, more confused, less yourself after interactions with this person, that pattern is a form of evidence. Dr. Herman emphasizes that recovery from psychological manipulation must begin with the recognition that something real has happened. That recognition does not require the other person's admission. It does not require anyone else's validation. It requires only that you look honestly at your own experience and say, "This is real. This is a pattern. And I deserve better than this." Gaslighting does not announce itself. It does not arrive with clear warning labels or obvious cruelty. It arrives in small moments, a denial here, a dismissal there, a gentle suggestion that your memory or your mind cannot be trusted, and it accumulates, quietly, until the person looking back at you in the mirror feels like a stranger. But here is what the research makes clear. The damage done by gaslighting is not permanent. Recognition is the first act of recovery. When you name what has been happening to you, when you stop dismissing your own perceptions and start treating them as information, something shifts. You do not have to have all the answers today. You do not have to make any decisions in this moment. You only have to begin to trust yourself enough to say, "Something here is not right, and I am worth paying attention to." Dr. Stern writes that the most important thing a person recovering from gaslighting can do is reconnect with their own reality slowly, consistently, and with support. That reconnection is not a moment. It is a practice. And every time you honor your own experience, you are practicing it. If this content has helped you see something more clearly, please share it with someone who might need it. Leave a comment below telling me which sign resonated most. With your experience, you do not have to share details, just a number. Your response may help someone else feel less alone. Subscribe if you want to continue exploring these topics together. Coming up next, the 5 long-term effects of narcissistic abuse and what genuine recovery actually looks like. You have already done something brave today, simply by paying attention.